Good morning. Good morning to this first conference session for today. Our theme is the built environment fit for the future. I don't know how fit you're feeling this morning, probably fitter than I am. But what we're going to be doing over the course of the next hour is exploring a number of different perspectives on the challenge that we all face in terms of getting our built environment fit for the future. Our focus, I'm sure, although we may touch on broader topics, is likely to be climate change. And I'll expand a little bit on that theme by way of introduction in just a moment. I'm going to do a little bit of scene setting, and then I'm going to invite contributions from each of our panelists. Each of them is extremely experienced in this space. The first contribution you're going to hear is from Lynn Seeney, who's the Head of Sustainability for Parsons Brinckerhoff, formerly Technical Director of Sustainable Development at the Building Research Establishment, an advisor to the Homes and Communities Agency, CABE, the Olympics and many other things. And she's going to be talking about how, in her current role, she helps organisations evaluate and plan for the risks around climate change. And she's particularly actually going to focus this morning on the risks associated with failing to adapt to climate change. Inevitably, a certain amount of change is going to happen, and it's how should organisations be preparing for that. We're then going to be hearing from David Goatman. David is Head of Sustainability Consultancy for Knight Frank. He's a former Senior Sustainability Advisor for the Olympic Legacy Directorate, and he's going to be focusing on how dealing with climate change is increasingly reflected in valuation, and how what is going to be the impact of energy efficiency as it becomes monetized through carbon pricing. That's going to be his particular theme. And then we'll go on to Joel Quintal, who's the Head of Sustainability for PRUPIM, the Prudential. He's responsible for sustainability reporting, community, a whole range of environmental programs at PRUPIM, and sustainable investment. And he's going to be particularly focusing on the risks associated with properties that do not improve in line with our need to improve energy efficiency and tackle climate change, and the influence that institutional investors are likely to increasingly have in this place. So a range of themes, and then what we'll do is we'll make sure we've got plenty of time to take your questions and involve you in a discussion where you can cross-examine our experts. As I said, I'm going to kick off. My name's Paul King. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Green Building Council. The council was launched about 3 years ago. It's a membership organisation. We call ourselves a campaign for a sustainable built environment. Our members are drawn from across the private sector, but also from government agencies and also NGOs. So we genuinely work across all sectors. And our agenda is quite simply to remove the blockages and barriers to delivering a more sustainable, low-carbon built environment. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, over the last few years, climate change has quite clearly come to the very top of the sustainability agenda. As I said a moment ago, it's by far and away, it's not the only thing that we're concerned about, but it's certainly the priority at the moment, certainly the priority in the political space at the moment when we're talking about sustainability. The government in this country, of course, is the first to legislate for climate change action. We're the first country in the world to have created a Climate Change Act with legally binding carbon reduction targets. And we are setting out on an extraordinarily ambitious but very important trajectory to reduce our carbon emissions by around 34% by 2020 and by at least 80% by 2050. This is a huge, huge challenge. And when, of course, we look at the sectors most responsible for those carbon emissions, and therefore the ones most likely to be in the limelight when it comes to mitigating those carbon emissions and dealing with this problem, we see the built environment absolutely in the front line. We reckon that something like 43% of all the emissions that the UK is currently counting towards those targets come from the way that we use energy in our buildings, our homes and our other non-domestic buildings. Fortunately, the experts believe that our buildings actually offer the best and the most cost-effective opportunities for mitigating climate change and cutting carbon emissions. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change fourth assessment report, published at the end of 2007, made this point extremely clearly. It showed that buildings offer by far and away the best opportunity. So that's the good news. Now, in this country, we've made some real leaps and bounds from being a country that frankly was lagging behind much of Europe until very recently. We're making some leaps and bounds in our current building regulations and other government policies, and certainly setting forward a trajectory for improvement in those standards, which takes us actually ahead of many of our Scandinavian and European partners. With our new buildings, starting with our new homes, we're now on a trajectory for zero carbon homes from 2016. So we see step changes in our building regulations this year, 2013 and 2016, from which point on our homes should not be making any net carbon contribution over the course of a year. We also are looking at a trajectory now for our non-domestic buildings. The government, on the back of some work actually done by the Green Building Council in its first year, set out an aspiration for all our non-domestic buildings to be zero carbon from 2019 onwards. The government recently consulted on that in more detail, and we can expect to hear more following the election about whichever government we get then is likely to take this forward. But it's fair to say that we seem to be beginning to set off on the right trajectory with regards to our new buildings. Of course, the problem is that even in a good year for construction, our new buildings only ever represent 1 or 2% of our building stock. The vast majority are the ones that are already standing today. And if we project forward to 2050, the point in time by which we're meant to have cut our total UK emissions by over 80%, we know that over 80% of the buildings standing are likely to be ones that are already standing and occupied today. So clearly, the often referred to elephant in the room is our existing building stock. And one of the big questions here is, what can we do about that? We've got nearly 26 million leaky existing homes. The vast majority of our homes are leaky creatures. Many of them are very old, and we're very fond of our old homes in this country, but in energy terms, they are gas guzzlers. The challenge, therefore, is how do we make significant home refurb, delivering much greater levels of energy efficiency, easy, affordable, and attractive for people. That's no mean feat, and it's the polar opposite of what it is at the moment. Most people agree with us when we say, actually, it is jolly difficult, it is expensive in terms of upfront costs, and actually for many people it's not very attractive to be getting stuck into improving the energy efficiency of their homes. We have to reverse that. And it's good to see that across all of the main parties' manifestos published over the last week or so, we see some measures, some steps being promised to get us on to this path. Most notably, perhaps, various versions variations on a theme around a scheme called Pay As You Save, which would offer people the opportunity to spread the upfront costs of refurbishment over a much longer period of time, and enabling for them to pay that out of the actual energy savings they would make on their bills. This could be a very important step forward in overcoming that upfront cost barrier. But there are other areas we need to look at too. We need to look at the accreditation of suppliers and installers so that people trust the people who arrive at their homes to undertake the refurbishment and make it a rather less painful experience than it is at the moment. And speaking as somebody who's trying to convert and update a house built in 1820 at the moment, I can tell you it is a pretty painful experience. The question hangs in the air: will government have to regulate to bring our existing homes up to standard? My personal feeling is yes, they will. It's only when you introduce a regulatory trajectory, as we've seen with our new homes, that actually you can galvanize industries, you can create the space in which people will invest and innovate, creating new services and new markets to deliver at the sort of rate we need to do. And let me just emphasize the rate and the scale at which we need to refurbish our existing homes. By a simple calculation, you can arrive at a figure of 4,000 homes that need to be upgraded to very high levels of energy efficiency every week for the next 30 years. That's a hell of a task compared to where we are today, where we are really only refurbishing a handful of homes to anything like the standard required. In terms of our non-domestic buildings, we have about 1.8 million of those, so on the face of it, it seems like a smaller challenge because there's rather less of them. But in other ways, of course, it still remains hugely challenging. The good news there, as highlighted by the Carbon Trust in a recent report they produced, is that there's an awful lot of money to be made and saved from improving those buildings. They reckon that between now and 2020, we could make a net contribution to the UK economy in terms of financial savings of over £4.5 billion and achieve carbon savings of between 70 and 75% in those buildings at no net cost. That looks like a pretty good business case to me. All of this adds up to the need for nothing less than really a revolution in the way that we are refurbishing our homes. And while the amounts of money involved are huge and somewhat daunting, looked at from the other way around, this is a huge business opportunity. We reckon that there are perhaps hundreds of thousands of new jobs that can be created, and there will need to be billions, probably tens of billions of pounds employed to make this revolution a reality. The UK Green Building Council, as part of our manifesto around this election period, has set out a challenge for us to actually halve the emissions from our UK built environment over the next 10 years. And I'll be happy to elaborate a bit more on that in the Q&A session. But the reality is that at the moment we don't have a clear government strategy for how we're going to decarbonise our building stock. We have a range of isolated policies and incentives, but we don't have an overarching strategy. The industry is not gearing up in a mainstream way to deliver this refurbishment revolution. And there are some significant tensions. Most often quoted is that of the landlord-tenant split, and particularly in our non-domestic buildings, where there's a separation between those who are expected to pay and those who are most likely to benefit from the improvements. So the questions are, can it actually happen? So that's all I'm going to say for now by way of setting the scene a little bit, and I would like now to invite Lincini to come up and give her perspective on how organisations can manage some of the risks and also begin to plan to adapt to the inevitable climate change that we're going to face. Thank you.